Hello everybody and welcome to Readings at Sexan, which has temporarily been changed into Readings at Home. My name is Silva. I'm a writer as well as a broadcast professional, and it is my distinct pleasure to be your host for this month's session of readings. Now, because it is October and it's the 31st of October at that, we've decided on a slightly spooky theme for this month, and we've got 5 writers who are waiting to share their work with you. We're going to get straight to it with our first writer, Golda Mo. Golda is actually very passionate about local stories told from an indigenous perspective. She has published 3 fantasy novels, Iban Dream, Iban Journey, and Iban Woman. She has also written 2 children's books, The Nanobots and Other Stories, as well as The Laughing Monster. And this year, she turned her attention to readers in Sarawak and has self-published 2 books titled Encounters and Fairycon. Now, it is from the latter, Fairycon, that Golda is going to be sharing a snippet from right now. Over to you, Golda.
Tapi Basa everyone, my first reading for Sexan. I am so excited. I'm Golda from Cebu. Maybe you know my novels from the Iban Dream series. Today I will be reading from Fairycon. This is one of the books that I have self-published in Cebu. It's too niche for a trade publisher, but too fun not to print. The plot of Fairycon is centered around the murder of a man called Matthew. Thomas, the murderer, persuades Rumias that her son has been invited by a red demon to go to the invisible world. When a conman hears the story, he hatches a plan to blackmail Thomas and con Rumias. Okay, here we go. So, page 21. Robert looked about him, watching the people interact. Customers greeted each other and the owner of the coffee shop. Then they turned to take a quick look at him. The table next to him was the last to be filled. There were 2 middle-aged women with shopping bags filled with discounted clothes. Robert let out a heavy sigh. He needed a new job. The bank account he had used to siphon the old couple's money had been frozen by the authorities, so he could not get anything out of it. If he tried, he knew that his whereabouts would be immediately made known to the police. He had less than 2,000 ringgits left in his wallet. Even if he were to stay at the cheapest lodgings, he would be homeless in less than 2 months. Gambling was out of the question, because the triads in Cebu were rumored to be especially vicious. Maybe that was why everyone was looking at him suspiciously. A young waitress came up to the 2 women and said, "Do you want your usual?" The woman in the blue blouse said, "Oh yes, please." The one in the orange shirt also nodded. After the waitress left to get their order, the woman in the orange shirt turned to her friend and asked, "Annie, how is the old lady?" "Still as mad as ever." "I tell you, my husband thinks her son's been killed." "I know. Even Alex has been to the house a few times these past 2 months to ask about Matthew." "Alex is a policeman, right?" "Yes, a surgeon, I think. He has been to the house quite a bit. Puan Romias keeps telling him that Matthew is away in Ulu Kapit, but Alex insists that his contacts in Kapit has not seen him." "Do you think she is involved?" "Impossible. She is very close to her son. She is superstitious and silly sometimes, but I think she would rather die than do any harm to him." "Doesn't the head servant say anything?" "Thomas? He is just as bonkers as Puan Romias. He's the one who tells me to put out a fresh pair of pajamas for Matthew every evening. I even have to change the sheets every week, almost as though they expect him to come back any day." Then she leaned in closer to her friend. Robert leaned in too. "Puan Ramias told me this afternoon that Matthew has been kidnapped by Bunsu Chit. Thomas saw it, she says." Annie sat back. Robert turned his head to look in the other direction, but one ear was turned to their conversation. The waitress returned to their table with their teas and fried noodles. "Sorry to keep you waiting. The kitchen is busy tonight. That will be 11 ringgits. As they passed her the money, Annie said, "It must be because of the Gawai Antu that the Longhouse in Kanawit is sponsoring. It's just a couple of weeks away. I hear that it is going to be a huge affair. It will be far busier towards the end of the month." The other woman said to the waitress, "I also hear that they have invited the best shamans and bards for the ritual. Maybe someone will give you a love potion, eh?" Annie playfully pinched her friend's shoulder, then turned to the waitress. "Don't you listen to her. There is no such thing." Robert got up from his seat. He had heard all he needed to hear. Now he only needed to find out who Matthew and Ramias were. It would be easy in this town, he decided. Hunching his back and keeping his head low, he walked out of the shop. A waiter picked up his empty glass and wiped the table. Moments later, a couple sat down at the table he vacated. The public library looked like it was stuck in the 80s. Robert wondered if they even had internet service. He could have gone to an internet cafe, but he was worried that someone there might recognize him. It was, after all, the haunt of people like himself, so he came to the public library. Thankfully, they did have internet service, but the person in charge looked him up and down first before she let him in to use the equipment. He was glad that he had decided to wear a long-sleeved collared shirt and a pair of thick-rimmed glasses. He even tied back his longish hair, making him look like a serious reporter or researcher. "Is this your first time here?" the librarian asked, as she led him into a room filled with 6 old monitors. "I have not seen you before." There was no one else using the facility in the room. Maybe the equipment was slow, he decided, and steeled himself for a tedious day. He was surprised when he saw a sleek towel casing under the table. The librarian smiled. No point in wasting money on fancy monitors when an old one works just as well. Robert laughed pleasantly. "This town is amazing. You people are so ingenious." The librarian beamed proudly. "Yes, I love my hometown. People are very practical here. We are the no-nonsense kind." Robert put down his notebook on the table. "I am doing some work on prominent Iban families in Sarawak. I hit a snag with Cebu though, because I know so little about the people here." A number of Iban heroes had moved to Reja, like Penghulu Daramunan or Langindan. Even Liba Rentap had gone to Julau. There is also Tun Juga's family in Kapit. Quite a number of books have been written about them. I'm more interested in the modern success stories, however. People who still maintain the old wealth, or those who have built up new wealth by their own skill and cleverness. Robert cocked his head to the side as though he was thinking hard. Then he said, "When I was in Kuching, someone told me about a Matthew and his mother Ramias." "Oh yes," the librarian said. "I know that family. They come from old money. Her husband Tutong was a successful businessman. He was involved in many things, like most family here. Timber, oil palm, land development, and other stuff." "That is perfect. Can you help me contact them?" "Oh dear, I am sorry. I only know them by reputation." "That's all right. You have been a great help. I will search for them online and contact them through one of their offices." The librarian then left him. He switched on the computer. As he waited for the software to fire up, he made a show of looking through his notes. You never know who might be watching. He had a new name, Tutong. Since Matthew was the son, he did a name search for Matthew Anak Tutong. The search returned multiple links of director profiles. He clicked on the first link. While waiting for the page to load, he wrote down the names of the 6 companies that had appeared on the search list. Then he looked up to read. His eyes widened with surprise. For a moment he wondered why the face he was looking at was so familiar. Then suddenly he realized that Matthew looked like him. They could easily have been twins. Robert was darker and thinner. That was all. Nangkat tu aja baca aku. My time's almost up. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.
Thank you for that, Golda. That was Golda Mo reading from Fairycon, which is her self-published book. Now we move on to our second reader for today, who is William Thum. William has had his fiction and non-fiction published by Ethos Books, by Penang Monthly, and by Loose Leaf Magazine. He previously served as the senior editor of the Vancouver-based Rice Paper magazine. His first novel, Kings of Petaling Street, was shortlisted for the Penang Monthly Book Prize in 2017, and his second novel is titled The Last Days. Here is William reading from The Last Days.
Hey, hello. Good to see everyone again virtually. And thank you, Sharon, for inviting me to be part of this month's readings. This will be the second time that I've appeared this year. And I'll be reading from the same book as last time. In this case, it's actually my second novel, The Last Days. This interesting thing about this was when the book came out. We timed it to be released in 2020, in line with the whole idea of Wawasan 2020, and also the fact that the book was set in 1981, when Dr. Mahathir became Prime Minister for the first time. There seemed to be quite a nice bit of resonance to it. So it's really quite a surprise what's happened this year. Everything has just gotten quite a little bit bizarre. So without spending too much time on the background of the story, I think the safest thing I can say about it is that it weaves together different threads from different points in time, starting in the pre-war period, moving on to the so-called Malayan emergency, and eventually everything collides in KL in the last 1 month of Tun Hussein On's time as Prime Minister. So for today's reading, what I will be doing is to look at a couple of characters. So these two characters are currently holed up in an anonymous apartment in KL at the very beginning of the story. So everything has been set in motion by the arrest of by a political journalist, and basically what happens to all the characters who are connected to him start to have to come to terms with the situation and what exactly will happen next. Okay, so with that introduction in mind, we shall begin. Sylvia was already gone by the time Dine awoke. He was left alone in his apartment in Kerinci, still sitting stiffly on the armchair where he had fallen asleep. He vaguely remembered a few snatches of conversation, but they were already relegated to vague memories. Sylvia seemed fiercer than ever, but much more tired, the bold colors of her clothes in stark contrast with the bland whiteness of his apartment. 6 months after moving in, his only decoration was a row of empty bottles of wine on the floor. "It was your bastard uncle," she said bitterly when he opened the door to let her in, fresh off 2 days spent waiting in the police station. "He told me there was no point waiting for Gordon. There's no word on when he will be released. Maybe he'll be sent to Pudu or something." Diane wondered if she was holding back tears, but her eyes, lined with blue, revealed nothing. She was so good at hiding away her emotions, and sometimes he had been unable to tell what she was feeling, and often misjudged her. Back when they were students, even when they had to worry about their theses and positions on the student council in Singapore, Sylvia had never been knowable. Even in their most honest moments, she always seemed to hold back. The worst part about their meeting was that even when she started talking about Gordon and Mangis, the journal, he zoned out of the story, becoming fixated on their shared past instead. Whispered discussions about Operation Cold Storm, meetings with clandestine leftists who cursed Lee Kuan Yew and his oppressive neocolonial policies. Her arms wrapped around his waist, holding him tight as they sped through the city at speed. Their student days had a sense of urgency to them. filled with a fiery mixture of love and youthful energy. But late one night, not long before breaking up, they walked away from a Hainanese cafe near the river. He felt sick the whole night. Dr. Agus changed mood as he ranted about Suharto and how Pramudia's novels were being seized by the Indonesian authorities. Sylvia got angry the longer Dr. Agus spoke about how there was less room for diversity. It means people like me are never going to be accepted, she said bitterly. Diane cringed, but he understood where her resentment came from. She had a Eurasian father and a Tamil mother who took her traveling across the peninsula, and during the long nights when it was too hot to sleep, she spoke breathlessly about the past and how easily her childhood memories were slipping away. It always surprised him how intently she listened when it was his turn to speak, holding on to his every word until daybreak. But that night in the cafe, he felt afraid and lonely. Life in Singapore was a temporary escape, far enough from home that they could fall in love without thinking of the future or the consequences and compromises. Listening to her outburst, he felt a strange mix of guilt and uncertainty. Questions of race, he understood, would always come between them. Soon they needed to make decisions that he was not ready to contemplate. His motorcycle was at the garage for repairs, so they walked back towards Clementi after Dr. Agus hailed a cab for the airport. Arms were folded as she walked a few steps ahead of him. Once so easy to take her in his arms, when she held on with a desperate intensity. But now she looked ready to give off an electric shock if he tried to touch her. He couldn't keep up. He stopped under a lamp close to the water. She stopped and turned to him curiously. Are you all right? The distant horn of a ship sounded from the sea. Do you think we have a future together? Perhaps if we got married? She did not say anything for a moment. Then she hurried back and hugged him tightly. It's so hard to say anything, she whimpered. She stifled a rare sob. They lasted only a few more months. Then Dain was put on probation, returning to Tela Ansun to face the anger of his family. When he eventually found a job at McAdams College, he came across Sylvia's name in a photography exhibition in Kuala Lumpur. She was a photojournalist, as he learned through a mutual friend, and eventually he calmed his nerves enough to give her a call. They could still speak, and even met on several occasions, but each time she seemed to become more distant, like a fading negative. She had a different life, and it was no use trying to hope the day could begin again. She even set him up on an unsuccessful date. When they had last met, he immediately noticed an engagement ring, and despite congratulating her, Diane excused himself and drank at the Coliseum bar until it closed for the night. And then he did not call her again until Gordon's arrest. So there's another excerpt from the story that I would like to read out. It's a bit of a dream sequence, a memory that Diane has much later in the book. This is right before the climax when things start heating up. But this is again like one last room for contemplation for the main characters before everything really kicks into motion. Right. That night, Diane was unexpectedly back in the old house in Tela Anson. It was empty and he could wander through the building like a ghost. The corridors were free of dust, and the books that his father carefully kept aside remained untouched. It was like stepping into a museum where everything except its inhabitants were preserved. He wondered where his mother was. His trail led to the locks on the river, where a ferry would take him across the river to the Dusans, banyans hiding red Chinese shrines. At the river's mouth lay the islands of the strait, and beyond that was Sumatra. His distant relatives lived there, speaking a Malay tongue that sounded almost like a different language. And further across this narrow strait was the Java of his mother's grandparents, living in the shadow of volcanoes until a working ship docked at Surabaya, ready to take them anywhere there was work. How they eventually ended up in Perak remained a mystery, and had conditions been different, he may never have been born. And now he remembered being young. His parents would drive him and his sisters down to the seaside. At night, the sound of waves washing on the shore was gentle, lulling Diane into thinking those holiday nights would never end. And his father would run to the waves and back again with Diane on his shoulders, strong enough for a holiday despite everything, Diane discovered much later, that was going on in the background. And instead, his father told fantastic stories of the princesses who flew into the strait, transformed into islands, of the sailor who left home only to return and forsake his mother, turning to stone, of the kings and queens of long ago, warring in distant kingdoms, aided by Garudas and fantastical beings. On the way back, they would always pay a reluctant visit to Iqbal and his wife, living in a chic house in Ipoh, before his uncle was transferred to the capital. Iqbal stood, solemn and regal, always making sure to dote on the children. With time, Iqbal became more monstrous and exaggerated, while his father faded. Then the water turned murky, sand and silt churned up near the mangroves. Young boys of 5 or 6 dived into the water in search of coins thrown off the ferry by laughing tourists bound for Bangkok. At the estuary, there was no sense of time, but the future and the past meant nothing. Then everything seemed frozen in place, the ripples refusing to move, and the evening sun fixed permanently in the west. Okay, thank you so much for listening. So the book is available in most major bookshops, um, in most cities, I believe. If not, it's always available for sale online. Okay, thanks everyone again for having me here, and I hope to see everyone in person when things get a little bit better.
Cheers for that, William. Thank you for sharing your work with us. Our third reader for today really needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce her anyway. Melisa Rani T. Silva is a writer and a spoken word poet who has notable performances at Storyfest Singapore, the Z Jaipur Literature Festival, and TEDx Gateway. Her first book, Taboo, is a poetic exploration of her master's thesis on the constructs and representations of the Malaysian Indian identity. Her poems have been translated into French and Bahasa Malaysia. She co-founded If Walls Could Talk Poetry Open Mic and co-published an anthology of 100 poems by 61 poets from Malaysia titled When I Say Spoken, You Say Word. Presently, she is a co-editor of the literary journal singporaimo.com. Take it away, Melisa Rani T. Silva.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Melisa Rani T. Silva, and I am very happy to be part of this incredible lineup for Readings at Home October edition. Today, I have 3 prose poems to share with you. They are experimental, they are finding their place in the world, masquerading as a short story and flash fiction all at once. But either way, I would like to call them each a piece on its own, and I hope they will find a place in your heart. This first piece is titled Request. In our final 30 seconds of being in each other's presence, you announce to me that this is the last time we will ever see each other one-on-one. Up until this point, we've been best friends for 15 years and had just consumed the most mediocre ramen from a shop that was trying to be Japanese. I ask you why, and you tell me that you are married now, as if it were a legitimate answer that requires no further explanation. Your wife has specifically requested that you no longer interact with your friends in a non-group setting. I do not understand. You say matter-of-factly that this requisition by your recently minted significant other is implemented across all genders, that my vagina and your lack thereof has nothing to do with our distancing. It makes sense to me now why you did not hug me before the ramen arrived. It makes no sense to me why you signed away your autonomy at 31 years old. I want to remind you of our years in high school when Puan Teo would walk between benches with a wooden 2-meter ruler and bark "Jara" if a boy and a girl sat too close together during Waktu Rehat. I want to stop you from relinquishing who you are to become someone's husband, just as my father had done. I want my sit on a veranda in our old bones best friend. I want you to be less of this person you've chosen to become. I want you back. But instead, I tell you that I respect that and wish you a happy marriage, because this is what you want, and I want you to have what you want for yourself. I do not tell you that I want to never see you again. The second piece is a reimagining of sorts. I've been on a lot of Zoom calls lately, and I'm sure you have too. And when you're on mute in Zoom for a long time, or if you're suffering from internet connectivity issues, sometimes the person on the other end keeps talking, but in question marks. Suddenly, everything they want to tell you sounds like a question. So I decided to write this piece as a series of question marks, as a one-way conversation. This piece has a content warning for themes of mental health and abuse. If at this moment in time you are not in a place to hear this poem, please feel free to skip a few more minutes ahead, maybe 2 or 3, and into the next poem. Till then, this is a poem written completely as questions. How many times can you slip and fall down on the same bathroom floor? Who do you blame, the floor or the feet? Before you crash upon the tiles, how do you decide which limb is dispensable? How quickly can you use it to separate gravity from the rest of you? Which part do you choose to protect? Do you practice pain often? Have you measured the necessity of height and volume required to break bones or injure a muscle? Which hurt do you want to achieve today, and for whom? Who needs to witness you in this state? When you dislocate your left side, are you aware that your entire body must compensate? Do you understand that your weight and responsibility will be distributed unfairly to all unaffected parties? Are you both victim and predator? Is your sling reusable? Are you aware that the word sling is a noun until you make it a verb? Does the navy blue match most of your clothing? Will you stop trying to shatter when left alone? Are you safe? Do you often stand on unreliable surfaces? Which circumstances of yours are genetically predisposed? Are you selectively able? Who enabled you to start falling down? Did they let you stop? Do you want to be rescued today? If no, how about tomorrow? When is a good time for you to be assisted in saving you? Will you allow your healing to begin? And finally, this piece I leave you with is a memory I want to leave behind. I remember the morning I left our home for the last time. It was effortless. My whole body moved in a familiar choreography, weighing the significance of one thing over the other before placing it urgently into the pink hush puppy suitcase with a wonky wheel. My future needed less of you, and I would fulfill this need by leaving you and the choices you've made at 3:45 a.m. You would think that once I had begun financing a life in Singapore dollar, I would be much more resistant towards leaving it or letting it waste by the temperament of one woman who refused to flush a toilet. You, filthy Singaporean. Was this your rebellion towards the regiment you voted for, the one you cannot control? When we become foreigners in another land, we are reminded by our forefathers that we instantly assume the role as representative of our homeland, that an entire nation will be measured against the sum of our behavioral quirks and bad habits. My nation and I both worry every day that my unwashed spoon in the sink will be immediately equated to the conclusion that Malaysians are dirty people. But here we are. You, our unflushed toilet, cigarette butts in the dryer, maggots in the microwave, your bleached hair clogging the shower drain to create a persistent half-centimeter flood of bathwater that never recedes, while I lock the door behind me to become homeless. And that's it. Thank you so much for having me. This has been really wonderful. I want you to know that all of these pieces today was enabled by Sharon Baka, who has helped me so much to push the pen across the page this year. I am ever grateful, Sharon. Thank you for making me believe in that a poem can exist off stage as prose in this form. And I hope you will enjoy the rest of the show. And also thank you, Param, for editing all of this. And I am very excited to meet all of you again in real life, hopefully soon.
That was the effortless and effervescent Melisa Rani T. Silva. Next on our lineup, we have for you Jason Eric Lundberg, who is the author and anthologist of 25 books. He is also the fiction editor at Epigram Books, as well as the founding editor of Lundberg, which is a journal of Southeast Asian speculative fiction. His writing has been anthologized widely, shortlisted for multiple awards, honorably mentioned twice in the year's Best Fantasy and Horror, and translated into half a dozen languages. Jason now reads from his latest novel, A Fickle and Restless Weapon.
Hello everybody, my name is Jason Eric Lundberg. I'm an American author living in Singapore, and I'm very happy to be part of Readings at Home for October. Thank you very much to Sharon and to Sumitra for inviting me to be a part of this. Today I'm going to be reading from my first novel, A Fickle and Restless Weapon, which came out this year from Epigram Books. And I'm going to be reading from a little bit into the book, not quite halfway, but it's quite a ways in, so I need to give a little bit of context. So this chapter is from the point of view of Vahid, who is one of my three protagonists of the book. He is an Iranian British puppeteer, and he is currently mourning the loss of his best friend Tof, who was killed earlier. And part of his grieving process is he's actually hallucinating his ghost. And he talks to him and has conversations, but nobody else can see him. So the only other thing that you need to know is that this takes place in the secondary alternate world of Tin Hau, which is kind of my alternate Singapore. And in this place, magic is possible, and there are people who have special abilities called Swees, and Vahid is actually one of these Swees. So this is from A Fickle and Restless Weapon. Fortune Center, so named for the Chinese fortune tellers who had congregated in the area from the mid-1800s until the newly independent Tin Hau government shut them down, but could not prevent them going underground, in 1977, was surprisingly busy for a weekday morning. The building boasted air conditioning, but not a single permanent shop could be found inside. Instead, the space was packed wall to wall with ad hoc stalls, or, more simply, just a folding table and a blanket on the ground to display wares. More akin to a thieves' market than any type of formal shopping, and Vahid thrived on the chaos of the place. Every meter or so was something new, something interesting, something a little bit shady. And no one ever knew the provenance of such items for sale, but those coming to Fortune Center generally weren't the ones to care. On the second floor, in a back corner near a Filipina selling one-to-one reproductions of famous paintings by Van Gogh, stood Lim Sing Loy, a dour expression on his face. Vahid wasn't surprised. His absence from the stall the past few days, no explanation, no warning, would have put anyone in a bad mood. Sing Loy was a fireplug of a man, squat but powerfully built, having worked for most of his life on construction crews around the country, until a crane accident had crushed his left leg below the knee. He couldn't afford the surgery and therapy that might have enabled him to keep walking on it, and so it had to be amputated. Not that this had slowed him down. Vahid once had seen him running for the bus with his cane, outpacing and overcoming boys 30 years younger and in the peak of health. "Oi, where you been, huh? Got plenty watches for you, la." "Sorry, mate, but I don't work for you." "What? I pay you, no?" "Yeah, but there's not exactly a contractual obligation, is there? You pay me for the work I do, but I'm not your employee." "Hey, maybe I find someone else then. What do you think about that?" Vahid shrugged. "You could do, but no one's better at this than me." He waggled his long, tapered fingers. "I'm an artist, not some hack. It's all in the details. You put a Rolex next to one of mine under the microscope, you can't tell the difference. You willing to give that up?" "Walao, I don't need this my age, you know." "I know, uncle. It's a shame to have to deal with someone like me," Vahid said and smiled. "So, what do you have for me today?" Sing Loy motioned behind the stall and Vahid stepped in. A large brown paper bag, streaked with condensation or grease or who knew what, its top folded over twice. Vahid opened it and beheld an assortment of what to the average person would be considered solely as junk, but to him was a wealth of potentiality. Watch parts from dozens of brands, segregated by make and model into snack-sized plastic sandwich baggies. Also inside the paper bag, curled into a tube, the newest copy of Keeping Time, Trade Journal of Watchmakers, containing interviews with CEOs and articles on new casting methods and the rise in popularity of kinetic plate swing pieces. But Vahid was most interested in the adverts. Slick, glossy, full-page close-up photographs of the watches he was hoping to forge, helpfully showing every detail of face, band, and crystal that he would need. As Sing Loy continued to stand in front, Vahid sat on his stool and paged through Keeping Time, his keen eyes scanning over details, imagining putting the parts together in his head. He was examining the minute architecture of a Patek Philippe 5131G white gold complicated world time model, when a gray and white tabby cat calmly wandered behind the stall and glared at Vahid. He sensed the eyes on him, and so stopped looking at the magazine and met the cat's gaze. "So, what's it you want, eh?" Vahid said. The cat shimmered for a moment, as if in a heat haze, and then the visual distortion grew upwards, reforming itself, twisting and sprouting and pulling in the light around it, producing a "f*** of displaced air. And then the cat was gone, and Toph shivered into existence in front of him. "Hey," he said. "Hey yourself," Vahid said. Sing Loy turned to look at him, most likely wondering why he was talking to himself, then looked ahead again. "Where have you been?" he whispered. "Oh, about. Didn't seem like you needed me much lately, so I disappeared back to wherever it is I go when you stopped thinking about me. But after a while it got boring, so I decided to come back. Something was pulling me back, actually, although it was different than usual. I feel strange." "Of course you feel strange, mate. You're a ghost." "No, it's different than before. I'm not quite sure how to explain it." From the other side of Fortune Center, a scrawny old Chinese man struck a curved wooden block with a stick, producing a resonant "tok" that made those around him stop what they were doing, momentarily stunned into attention before going back to whatever it was they were doing before. The old man slowly made his way around the perimeter of stalls, never stopping, just looking at the wares for sale but never buying, talking his block as people tried to ignore him. Vahid followed his progress, and Toph as well, remaining silent, watching the slow march of someone following his own melody, until the old man stopped at Lim Sing Loy's watch stall and stared directly at Vahid. He said something in Chinese, assertiveness coming through even though Vahid couldn't understand the content, and he held out his hand, palm up, as if asking for spare change. "You fortune teller," Singloy said with a sniff. "Say he want to tell your future. Only cost 2 diem." Vahid turned to Toph. "Should I?" "Sure, why not? Why the hell not?" "Waste money only," said Singloy. Vahid fished in his pocket for a purple 2 diem note and passed it over to the old man, who swiftly disappeared the money. Vahid gave the man his palm, and it was examined closely for several long moments, the old man tracing the lines lightly, so near that Vahid could feel his hot breath. But then the old man straightened up, let go of Vahid's hand as if he'd just touched a dog turd, shouted something angry at him, then spat, a long globular blackish sputum that struck Vahid in the center of his chest and oozed slowly down with the consistency of maple syrup. The old man rushed away, muttering under his breath. "What the shit was that about?" Toph said. "Puh," Singloy said, watching the old fortune teller hurry away. "He say you a gay and he won't deal with you." Vahid went back into his pocket for a tissue to wipe off the gob, and at the same time Toph burst out from behind the stall, running down the row, chasing the old man down. Vahid laughed quietly to himself. He appreciated the gesture from the figment of his imagination, but what the hell could Toph do to the guy? Nobody could even see him other than Vahid. But then Toph caught up to the old man, swung back a foot, and kicked the old fortune teller solidly in the behind, lifting him several centimeters above the floor. The old man yelped in surprise and retreated to the main entrance, as Toph hurled obscenities at him. After the old man was gone, Toph strutted proudly back to the watch stall, a big confident grin on his face. Vahid knew his mouth was wide open from shock, but the muscles in his jaw seemed to have temporarily stopped working. "Man, that felt good," Toph said. "How?" Vahid sputtered. What? How the fuck did you just do that?" "Vahid," Toph said, gripping Vahid by the arms. The touch was solid, real. "Dude, I've got to get to an internet cafe. Like now." He turned and strode back towards the entrance of Fortune Center. What? "Oi," Singloy said. "You introduce me to your friend or what?" And I will stop right there. Thank you very much for listening.
That was Jason Eric Lundberg reading from his latest novel, A Fickle and Restless Weapon. Our final reader for October's readings is Zen Cho. Zen is the author of the Sorcerer to the Crown novels and a novella, The Order of the Pure Moon Reflected in Water, as well as a short story collection, Spirits Abroad. She is a Hugo, Crawford and British Fantasy Award winner and a finalist for the Locus and Astounding Awards. She was born and raised in Malaysia, resides in the UK and lives in a notional space between the two. And we're delighted that Zen Cho wraps up October's readings at home for us.
Hi, I'm Zen, and I'm just going to read today from my latest book. It's a novella called The Order of the Pure Moon Reflected in Water. It came out from Tor.com Publishing in June, and it's about a team of bandits in a Usia take on Emergency Malaya. This is actually an advanced reader's copy because I like annotating books that I'm reading from. But you can see the version as released up there, so it was released in hardcover. Just a really cute little hardcover because it's because it's a novella. So I'm not going to read from the beginning. I'm going to read basically from the second chapter. The book starts when a bandit called Lao Fengqiong enters a coffee house, and he ends up brawling with a customer in defense of a waitress. His sworn brother Tetsang joins him, and then they all get kicked out. So this scene that I'm going to read now takes place after that fight, when they have rejoined their company of brothers. Tetsang's eyes snapped open. He threw himself on the intruder, rolling them onto their back. The waitress from Winghua Coffee House stifled a squeak. Her alarm changed to relief when she saw Tetsang's face. "It's you, brother," she said, pleased. "I was wondering which one you were. You all look the same in the dark." The others stirred. Ahin, who was on watch, leapt up, shouting, "Big brother! Intruder! Fire! Attack!" Feng Cheng was at his feet, his knife at the ready. "Asang, you caught him? Who is it?" Tetsang sat back on his haunches, letting the waitress go. She dusted herself off fastidiously. "Nobody," said Tetsang. "Just a woman." Someone lit a torch, and the scene blossomed into clarity. The groggy men rubbing their eyes and reaching for their weapons, the bald woman with her calm, infuriating smile. A nun, the waitress corrected him, a votary of the Order of the Pure Moon reflected in water. You are the girl from the coffee house, said Feng Qiong. What's your name? Said Tetsang. My birth name was Guet Im. Ah Hin had digested the implications of the waitress being a follower of the Pure Moon. That girl is a witch, he said. Must be she enchanted me. That's why I fell asleep. Suspicious muttering rose from the group like a bad smell. Did you enchant Ah Hin? Said Tetsang. Guet Im looked injured. No. Brother was already sleeping when I came. He looked tired, so I tried not to disturb him. I was looking for you, brother. What for? You're the one I know, explained Guet Im. Tetsang jerked his head towards Feng Qiong. You know him what? Yes, but you're the one I trust, said Guet Im. Because of you, I fought that guy, said Feng Qiong, offended. Yeah, said Guet Im apologetically. Sorry, brother. But because of your fight, Mr. Ao fired me. He would have fired you anyway. You cannot go around hexing customers and expect to keep your job. It's bad customer service. He might have changed his mind before you got involved, argued Guet Im. Anyway, this brother was actually helpful. She gestured at Tetsang. He gave me money. He did? Said Feng Qiong. He clapped Tetsang on the back, delighted. Asang, you didn't say? When you're always scolding me for being too generous? All the more we shouldn't worry. That coffee house earned a lot of money today. It would be too ungrateful if they put the mata on us after all that. I'm not at the coffee house anymore, said Guet Im. I said they let me go. Tetsang said to the nun, I gave you the money so you would go away. What happened to it? Guet Im held up a soft black thing like the hide of a small animal. It turned out to be a wig. I bought this so I'm not so conspicuous. It fell off when you jumped on me. She put it on her head. The effect was singularly unconvincing. I still have the rest of the money, she added. I thought of getting pots and pans, maybe some cooking chopsticks. But I wasn't sure what you all had already. Huh? Said Tetsang. Oh, I'm joining you all, said Guet Im. Didn't I say already? You definitely did not say that. Guet Im looked piteous. But I don't have anywhere else to go. Brother caused me to lose my job, she meant Feng Qiong. Another thought struck her. And you saved my life! So that's 2 reasons why you have to look after me now. Tetsang's brow furrowed. Wait, how does that even... Don't worry, brother. I won't be a burden. I'll make myself useful. I learned how to cook at the coffee house. And, the nun added with rather more confidence, I'm great at cleaning. We're roving contractors, said Tetsang. We have nothing to clean. Oh, I wouldn't say that, said Guet Im, looking at Tetsang's clothes in an unflattering way. Contractors, huh? I thought you all were bandits. What kind of contract work do you do? Building houses? Stuff like that? What? Stuff like that, said Feng Qiong. It was evident the nun amused him. This was a bad sign. Feng Qiong would do anything for a laugh. Tetsang glared at him, but before he could say anything, Abun intervened. Maybe it's not such a bad idea, big brother, he said to Feng Qiong. It gets boring just as men. A woman in the group could contribute something different. She says she'll make herself useful. I'm sure she could help us out. Do more than cooking and cleaning. You won't mind being kind to us, right, little sister? Abun chucked the nun under her chin. It was like watching an idiot child pull a tiger's tail. Tetsang leant back. But Guet Im kept her hands in her lap. She looked puzzled, but after a moment her face cleared. Oh, you mean sex. Would you want me to have sex with you? No, said Tetsang. Yes, said Abun. Maybe, said Feng Qiong. Guet Im considered it. I can do that. I've never done it before, but it can't be difficult, right? Even cats and dogs know how to do. Of course, she added. As a devotee of the pure moon, I vowed when I first shaved my head that I would have no profane intercourse with men. If I break my vow to the deity, I must make sure to cleanse myself afterwards. I would need to make a sacrifice each time. We are very open in this company, said Feng Qiong. Everyone can practice their religion. No problem. She means, said Tetsang, she'd have to chop off the dick of any man she fucked. That's right, said Guet Im. You're very clever about our doctrine, brother. Are you a follower also? Chop off our dicks, said Abun. It's how I would wash out the sin, said Guet Im, using the men's blood. Strictly, my teacher would say I must do the cleansing even if I didn't go so far as to have the profane intercourse. Even thinking of betraying my vows is enough. If you're being strict, I should make the sacrifice now. You've raised the subject. She directed a speculative look at Abun's crotch, but shook her head. But I think that's too rigid. Let's see what happens. I'm homeless, I have nowhere to go. I'm sure the deity will close one eye on this occasion. Of course, if she doesn't, we'll soon find out, she said brightly. The deity is amazing. There was one time this novice at my tokong stole the joss sticks to eat. She was always a bit weird. And before anyone even found out, her father's house burnt down. The family lost everything. We can't take her, said Abun to Feng Chiang. But that Tsang had read the signs right. Feng Chiang hadn't been that interested in the sex. He'd already made up his mind. He replied, you may enjoy Ai's cooking, but I'm getting fed up. Big brother, if you don't want me to cook, I don't have to do it, said Ai in a throbbing voice. Don't be stupid, said Tet Sang. Your food is disgusting, but nobody else can do it. At least you appreciate me, second brother. Tet Sang turned to the nun. This is ridiculous. You can't come with us. Take your money, get out of here, and find another job. He grabbed her arm, intending to escort her out of their camp, but it was like trying to shift a boulder. Gwetin wouldn't budge. She remained seated, cross-legged like a statue of the pure moon in repose. Now, Tet Sang looked at his hand, then at her. No. You're not the boss, said Gwetin. She nodded at Feng Chiang. Brother is the boss. I knew it straight away, from the nobility of his countenance. I was the helpful one, Tet Sang reminded her. The one who gave you money, remember? You said you didn't trust Alao? I trust him now, said Gwetin. Before, I admit I misunderstood him. I thought, who's this busybody fellow? Poking his nose into other people's business? Nobody asked him to beat up that guy also? Because he wants to show off I must lose my job. But now, I see I was wrong. This encounter has shown me his true character. Brother is like a knight-errant of the olden days, rescuing people from corrupt authority. His heart is like beaten gold, as beautiful as his face. She gazed at Feng Chiang, her eyes shining. Tet Sang's heart fell. Feng Chiang loved being gazed at adoringly. Gwetin reached out a reverent hand, touching Feng Chiang's shin. Brother, she said, I know you won't let me down. So that's from the second chapter, and you can get it. It's out now. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you, Zen. And thank you to each and every one of our readers who participated in October's Readings at Home. If you've liked what you watched today, please feel free to share this video. We are on Facebook and we're also on YouTube. We look forward to your support, and on behalf of the readings team of Sharon and Param, thank you so much for watching. Tell your friends about this, please, and we'll see you for November's readings. Take care, everyone.